Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If any of you caught the debate last night, I am sure you, like me, are possibly in need of a little help unpacking, maybe sublimating some of those heavy existential feelings. So I hope that this discussion tonight might provide some perspective for you. I'm Maria Murphy. I'm the Interim Associate Director of the Alice Paul Center, and we are very glad to be in this slightly weird virtual community with you all. I'd like to highlight a couple of events coming up after tonight that might be of interest. This Friday at noon, we have our first work in progress presentation from our new ACLS Emerging Voices Fellow, Jorge Sanchez Cruz, who will present Debility, Negative Affect, Mobility, Undocu-Queer Aesthetics, and the Right to Thrive. And on Thursday, October 8th at 5 p.m., we'll be presenting Cis Uprising with Arian Wilkerson and our sax artist in residence, Ricardo Bracho. This critical Kiki will feature excerpts from several of Wilkerson's performances and also the premiere of their work, The Cis Uprising, which is a conceptual Black spectacle on COVID and the protests, the interwoven legacies of race, gender, and sexuality, and Black queer artistic insurgency. You can find out more about these and other events at our website, gsws.sas.upenn.edu. I would like to begin our event today with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement, for anyone who may not be familiar with the practice, often takes place at the beginning of lectures, ceremonies, and public events such as this public discussion. To acknowledge is one small way to show respect to Indigenous peoples and their enduring connection with their traditional territories and its histories. In an effort to recognize both the historical and ongoing practices of colonization, we wish to affirm that the Alice Paul Center and Program in Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at the University of Pennsylvania occupies the traditional unceded lands of the Lenni Lenape people. We wish to acknowledge that the many legacies of violence, displacement, and migration and settlement that bring us together in this community that, while virtual today, is based out of Philadelphia. Our year at the center, dedicated to environmental feminisms, broadly construed, is part of an ongoing effort to recognize our own individual and institutional place in settler colonialism and to better understand the relationship between Indigenous knowledges and climate activism by engaging these ideas alongside other feminist work more broadly this year. We present this Election Reflections event as part of these efforts to take both a sober examination of the institutions and systems by which we are governed and govern ourselves, and an imaginative perspective about what might be possible to enact a more just world. Okay, let me bring in our speakers tonight, who are both extremely sought after interpreters of our current political landscape. So first we have Anthea Butler, who is an associate professor of religious studies and Africana studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and she is also on faculty with gender, sexuality, and women's studies. She's the author of Women in the Church of God in Christ, Making a Sanctified World, and she's working on two other books right now, White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America, out in March 2021, and Reading Race, How Publishing Created a Lifeline for Black Baptists in Post-Reconstruction America. Dr. Butler is a leading commentator across basically all platforms, from the History Channel to CNN to Twitter, providing practically telescopic insight on some of the most pressing political issues of our contemporary moment. Most recently, she orchestrated a border-crossing scholar strike to both bring attention to and create teach-ins on racial injustice and police violence, providing a model on how to harness labor power and intellectual power in the academy to effect change with and beyond the tools of our craft. Dawn Teele is an associate professor of political science and an executive board member of Penn's program in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. She's the author of the award-winning book, Forging the Franchise, The Political Origins of the Women's Vote. Dr. Teele has made major contributions in theorizing voter enfranchisement, providing innovative perspectives on field methods and poli-sci and the social sciences more broadly, and her work across public, popular, and academic forums has synthesized divergent historical trajectories of and offered sharp insights on women in electoral politics. Her recent volume, Good Reasons to Run, Women in Political Candidacy, addresses the continued barriers to women's participation in American politics. So I'd like to thank you both very much for speaking today, hopefully helping us kind of sublimate some of these existential feelings after last night's debate. And just a quick note about the format tonight. I'll get us started with a couple of questions. Anthea and Dawn will chat for a while, and then we'll turn to our Facebook and YouTube audiences for questions, including one prepared question from one of our GSWS students. So maybe I'll just get the ball rolling by asking you both. It seems like every single federal election is labeled as the most important election of our lifetime. Is this the most important election of our lifetime? And you're both muted, just FYI. Oh, you're Dr. Butler, you're still muted. There you go.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm like, well, yeah, they're all important, but this one is probably particularly important because we've never had a president say, essentially that he was going to contest the results. We've never had a president who basically said, I'm going to activate the Proud Boys. We never had a president who tore up the mail service and told everybody that mail-in ballots are bad. I mean, can I go on? There's like 100 reasons why this is the most important election, because on top of it all, we're in a pandemic. So yes, it's an important election. And I think that we cannot underestimate the kinds of things that will happen if people don't get out to vote. And I'm so interested to hear from Dawn about this because I'm thinking about the kinds of things I know that are happening right now in the African American community. I saw on Twitter today that Trump was running a lot of ads on one of the urban radio stations here in Philadelphia. And I'm like, dude, I know you're really trying and I know why you're trying, but it ain't gonna work. So yeah, I think it's really important. And I think that this is an election that we need to pay attention to on so many levels. But I will probably say some things tonight that might be surprising to people about serious issues like the court and all of that. So I'll leave it at that and let Dawn chime in. Mute.
I'll get better at this by the time the pandemic is over. I think political scientists are trained both to think that every election is the most important election and that none of them are particularly important. And I think we've taken for granted that despite, the challenges of each administration and each election and the tensions that come up, that America's democracy will endure. But that's part of this narrative of American exceptionalism that people who are in my own home turf of comparative politics have always kind of questioned. And so what's interesting in this election is thinking about how, with the rise of Trump and Trumpism, America is among many countries in the world that have had a turn to both populist leadership as well as, race baiting, xenophobic rhetoric from the leadership. And so in many ways, I think that in this election, we are seeing America as being, one of its neighbors in a sense.
Well, perhaps we can just jump on Dr. Butler's comment about the court. So maybe let's just jump right in with that topic. A lot of folks are focusing on the recent passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's been followed by a lot of talk about nominating a woman for this Supreme Court vacancy. Biden has insisted that his nominee will be an African-American woman. Trump has, of course, named Amy Coney Barrett as his nominee. So I'm wondering, can you comment on this potential nomination of a woman, but how is it operating in these contexts? Is this progressive material change? Is this a superficial maneuver? And then, after that, are we ready to abolish the Supreme Court, offload these settler colonial ways of thinking, perhaps, or any of those threads that you could comment on?
Well, let me start. This is really interesting because Amy Coney Barrett represents the pinnacle of the kind of stuff that I study. I deal with evangelicals and right-wing republicanism, kind of Christianity, right? So for them, this is the pinnacle of what they've wanted. They've wanted somebody to be able to change the court, and especially to have a woman on the court who might be able to vote against Roe v. Wade to rescind that. And I think this is everybody was very upset when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, obviously. But I think the moment is not this moment. And I have a reason why I'm saying it. The moment was really back in the Obama administration when all of these judgeships did not get filled. So it's not just about Amy Coney Barrett. It's about the 200 plus judges that Trump and Senator McConnell have been able to put in and pretty much ramrod through these last 4 years. So this creates a series of issues and very important issues to deal with. And I think that what I would say for Democrats and people, who are independents, who are maybe left leaning, the issue becomes, why didn't you pay attention to this before? This has been a 50-year game for the Republican Party, and they won it, okay? And they are taking the ball over the finish line. Now the question becomes, if Biden wins, will he expand the court? I would say probably. And that's why I say maybe we don't have to worry about this as much now, because there's really not a lot to do about it. And the Democrats have already indicated that they're not going to do a lot about it either, which completely infuriates me. And that's a whole nother story, but that's personal. I think that the lesson to be learned here, though, is how the Republicans have played the long game and played a chess game and basically got what they wanted. So this has very big implications, not simply for Roe v. Wade. It has implications for civil rights. It has implications for LGBTQI rights. This is going to be really important when we start to think about things like, masterpiece cake and all of this kind of stuff. Are people going to be able to take religious exemptions for all of this? There is so much that this court can destroy that I think it is imperative. I don't think that Biden will have a choice. He doesn't want to commit to it right now, but I think if he wins and we have this transition that goes through, that there is no other way except to expand the court. Should they get rid of the court? I think so. I mean, in no other country do we have a legal body that is able to wreak so much havoc on everyone's lives. And it's really kind of, in a sense, a conservative bastion to be able to regulate other people who are not the rich and the famous or the privileged in this nation. So where the court might have been through Thurgood Marshall in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a liberal kind of court that was putting things through that would help society, I see the court now as a deterrent.
I mean, if I can hop in there, I have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Butler, and I wanted to add into the laundry list of very important things that this court nomination affects our campaign finance. And I think a huge problem in American politics presently is, the personhood status of corporations and the, relaxation of campaign finance laws. I guess I tend to think of the court as less problematic than the Senate. And to me, the thing that is the most undemocratic thing in this country that is, that has been leading to the conflict that we are beginning to have, this demographic conflict in national politics, is the Senate. And that's because it's malapportioned based on population. Each state, no matter how small, gets 2 representatives. And, they have veto power over many decisions that have been held by the Republican Party for a while now. And so I think, when I think about electoral reform, to me, the things that it would be most important in the United States to decrease polarization, which I think is polarization, I think, is a negative for society. It's really bad for my family. I can tell you, not in my household, but like in my greater family, are very polarized. And it's making things kind of awkward. And I think that's only going to continue. But many people in my family are perfectly happy to be part of the party that continues to lose the popular vote, but nevertheless gets to exercise undue influence in politics. But that if the demographics were reversed, they would be doing everything they could to change the electoral law to have it be more representative. And so, I kind of think of the Supreme Court as being nefarious, but at times having the potential for good. Maybe I'm idealistic on that, but I think that like the Senate is the biggest problem in our country.
I can see where you think that, and I agree. I also do think, though, that part of it is, with the Senate, if we could get, DC to become a state, and we could get, Puerto Rico to become a state, that becomes a little bit more balanced, right? That's those are two ways to do that. And then the other thing really is to, let's have some term limits, okay? I don't want to be ageist, but basically we have a lot of people who should have been retired a long time ago, and there was a remark that was made, unfortunately, by a doctor who said, I'm prescribing a lot of, basically Alzheimer's medications for some of the Senate members. I'm like, this is not a good deal, right? Because the kinds of things you have to remember. So I think that, both and for these things are really important. And I also think that, in the sense that if we're going to throw the Senate in here, we might as well throw the other thing in, which is really important, and that's the Electoral College.
Yeah.
That probably just needs to go away, absolutely, positively, because again, that is disproportionate representation.
Yeah.
And so this is how Trump won last time. I mean, when you start to think about it, just think about how much that, the last two big elections, 2000, 2016, were not because the person who got into office had a majority win. We had in 2000, we had, George W. Bush, who the Supreme Court had to decide. And there's, interesting, nefarious stuff there with Amy Coney Barrett counting ballots and throwing ballots out in Florida, right?
Well,
So
and Gorsuch, who was the hack down in Florida, who was dealing with,
Exactly. So it's like repayment for everything that they've done, repayment, right? So this is where things get really interesting, I think. And then we have Trump, who wins by these incredibly slim margins in weird spaces where he gets enough electoral votes, right? Where Hillary Clinton wins over 3 million, popular votes. So, I mean, these are the ways in which we think about this is a disenfranchisement of a different kind. And I think that it's really important that whatever happens, should the Democrats get in, they really need to, instead of sort of paying lip service and hoping that things just go back to normal, they really have to think about some fundamental changes in the system, or else we're going to be stuck again with this kind of thing come 2024.
Well, I know you said something about how you wish that they were going to fight the Barrett nomination a little bit harder. And I actually have a question for you related to your research. So, over my dinner table, we've been arguing about whether or not they should fight it. And part of me feels like, by taking the hit where it's clear that they have the ability and the right, that, whatever, they have the right to do it, making it less of an issue and less of a political win for Trump when she gets appointed is maybe the way to do it. But I was also concerned that fighting that tooth and nail might actually alienate some Black voters. And I wanted to hear, not that you can speak for all Black voters, but specifically, I was curious about Black evangelicals, because from what I've read, it seems like the majority of Black Protestants are evangelicals. And so I just was wondering, what's that political space like on this issue?
Yeah, that political space is really interesting because I would say there's two types of Black evangelicals. There's the Black evangelical that falls in with the white evangelicals, okay? Right. So when we're talking about Black evangelicals, we really need to make a differentiation between those who identify, very strongly with the Republican Party, okay? Who are, in the party like a Bishop Harry Jackson or someone like that, who is very much tied to the party, or, Daryl, that guy that's always following around Trump. People like that are around Trump right now, think about them as sort of these Black evangelical Republicans, right? And they would, definitely laud that. I'm also thinking about Alveda King, who's very big in pro-life circles. Okay, so they would approve of her, and they would be upset if you got after her because of the pro-life issue. And I'm gonna throw another monkey wrench in what you said. Now, the other Black evangelicals who are, in Black churches like a TD Jakes or something like that, who are Black evangelicals, but mostly vote Democratic. And they vote based on that because of social issues and not necessarily because they are not pro-life. They just know that they can expand their thinking and vote Democrat. These might be a little upset about it, but they won't be as upset because, basically the issues of Black Lives Matter, the white supremacist stuff that Trump is doing, the issue of COVID in the communities and people dying, the economic issues, these outweigh these religious issues. I call these voters, they're able to separate their lives a little bit better and to think about that. But here's the third piece that I think is an interesting piece. The third piece that might be an interesting piece are Black Catholics. Catholics, and Black Catholics who are actually thinking about, pro-life issues and wanting to follow through with the church, but don't at the same time, are really torn about, how do they vote, right? I think this is a very small percentage of people, but I do think that presents the interesting space here for what has happened. Now, that may all blow away from, last night. And I'd like to know what Amy Coney Barrett thinks herself of last night's, performance, because honestly, to come in under this president, it puts a mark on your judgeship in a different sort of way. Last thing, you didn't ask me this, but I'll add it. I think that, this issue about the group that she's involved with, how are people going to ask about her Catholicism and all that? This is really important because, there's a way in which you have to ask not so much about her faith. It doesn't matter, if she's Catholic or not. That's not the issue. What matters is that this group that she's in is basically, has you sign oaths. They've got certain kinds of ways of believing and thinking and how they order their instruction of their lives.
The Federalist Society?
Yeah, no, not Federalist Society, the other religious group that she's involved with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the name, but I'll pull it up here in a minute. But this is an important part about, how are they going to question her? And so I'll be really interested to see how Kamala Harris handles her in the Judiciary Committee, because that's going to be a really dicey thing. You have to be careful with her because, you can't just say, well, you got all these kids and, what does this mean, right? They've got to be able to ask her about this organization in such a way to where it puts,
From People of Praise.
People of Praise, yes, thank you. I couldn't remember. I got so many things in my head. Yeah, People of Praise.
I grew up in People of Praise.
Oh, you did? Oh my God! So we can have a whole other child. We need to talk. So I'm curious because there's been some questions about this, and this is not something that I've written about, but my friend Massimo Fajoli has written about it at Villanova, and he has some real questions about. I don't think you can ask her about this, but I think you can ask her about this, right? So I think that's a really important question about how they're gonna talk to her about this, and I think you could ask that question. If we had our first, and I don't think it's just a Catholic thing or People of Praise thing. I think it's also, if there was a Mormon, you might ask, well, you take oaths in the temple. You do certain kinds of things. What does this mean? Are you going to be able to be faithful? The kinds of questions that got thrown at JFK back in the 60s, it might come up again. Who knows? I'll leave it at that, but we have to talk about that.
Oh, shit.
I know you're like, oh, crap. Well, this makes for an interesting conversation then.
Well, hopefully this is not too an abrupt shift, but one thing that I was really hoping to ask you both is to think about how abolitionist thinking has found its way into, mainstream political commentary, the public imaginary, in a way that I haven't witnessed, at least in my lifetime or since I've been following politics. Is there a chance that this election is, still could be a referendum on the power of law enforcement in this country? Or are we still bound to questions of reform without a real reckoning with the origins of policing and ongoing police violence in this country?
Let me just ask you to rephrase a second about, let me make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. Are you talking about police reform in light of this election cycle, or police reform in general, or?
I'm asking about the more kind of, not just police reform, but police abolition, that has garnered some attention and has actually garnered some public support. And it seems to me an unprecedented way in this election cycle. And yet, last night during the debate, when Biden was asked about it, it was all about reform and additional funds. It certainly wasn't about defunding and abolition. And yet I still hold a small amount of hope of the currency of that term that has been circulating, it seems to me, in a more worthwhile way in this cycle.
Dawn, I'll let you go first, and then I'll add.
Well, given Kamala Harris's background, I doubt she has a big appetite for completely defunding or abolishing the police. A cop, more or less. And Biden has always said that he's against it. Clearly, in many states, they're having important conversations about this, but, there's two problems, I think. One is there are a lot of things that the police do that the police should not be doing in the first place. But we do not have a decent or centralized, mental health care in this country, not in the States, let alone in the country at large. And so a lot of issues that cops are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, house calls and things like that, are things that in other countries, you might actually be having other types of social services address. The other problem is, and by the way, like everybody I've ever seen with a gun in front of a Capitol is a white person. Whatever Trump said about yesterday, like that the white people, that the Republicans don't do this, that they're not armed. It's like, wait, have you seen those protests during the beginning of the lockdown and now the protests about the masks? Like, those are white people in public that are armed. Like, give me a break. But the other problem that we have to confront is that America is a heavily armed country compared to many other countries. And so, on the one hand, we have completely bankrupt any kind of social services that might possibly deal with or triage any number of neighborhood type issues or domestic issues or whatever it is. And on the other hand, people who are walking into an unknown household or neighborhood in a nice white suburb, they might face somebody who's armed. And so I think that, like, without a bigger conversation about de-arming American society, this idea of completely abolishing the police is a political non-starter.
I think for the people who've talked about, abolishing the police, the conversation has not been a clear one. And so when you start to talk about abolition, you need to really be clear about what that means, how that would look. It's not about, totally getting rid of police, but it's about, reducing the amounts of funding and cutting the amounts of funding and putting that money in different spaces in the community so that you can have, community monitors, you can have mental health professionals that go out when somebody sort of loses it, instead of the police coming out and shooting somebody who's naked in the middle of the street, you got somebody to come out and talk to them and do some things, right? And so I think the conversation about abolition is important, but I think in a political, year such as this one and this political atmosphere that we're in, it gets lost and it's used as a weapon against, Joe Biden and other people, because basically, that's a Democratic thing. They don't want to do this, how people talk about it. I think what is important, though, I think what you said about the weaponization is really true. I mean, we have police forces that are weaponized like, small nation armies, basically. And the kinds of things that we're looking at in Portland right now, where you've had, tanks and things like that, what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, all these other kinds of, escalations, it's clear that the kind of training that's happening is not really helping. And so we have to start to think about what else is going on here. What are the psychological stressors? What's all that? And that's not to say that I'm, feeling real sorry for people, but I'm also asking the question about what does it mean to not just train people, but to make sure that they have support systems so that they know how to deal in these kinds of situations. And I think this is one more thing too, and this is probably will be controversial. Being a police officer or a state police trooper or whatever whatever you might be, these are some of the few professions left that you can only have a college degree for, under a high school degree. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to do anything. And I realize I speak from a privileged position, having degrees, and I don't want to cut anybody else off, but I do think that there should be some kind of training other than a police academy for people who are going into law enforcement. I think it's really crucial for them. They need to understand something about criminology. Some people are trained and a lot of people aren't. And so this is, a space in which, people who have, issues about what they think law and order is and all that go into this. If we can think about that kid who went in and shot two people in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, I mean, that's somebody who wanted to take law and order into his own hands. How would that have been different if he had gone into police force instead of being his own vigilante, right? And so I wonder if we have people like this who are in police forces right now who really feel strongly about issues and feel strongly about crime or what they think is crime, right? But need to be trained in terms to look at their own biases and to look at the things that brought them into that kind of field in the first place.
Well, and many of them come from the Army. It's like demobilized Army who are trained as combatants,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, we definitely have an issue, and I think one of the things about this election cycle, I'll bring this up because I think it's a really crucial point if we're going to talk about abolitionism. I think this is why a lot of police unions are involved with Trump and have signed on to say that they are supporting him, which makes me really nervous because if we have civil unrest after the election, I'm like, I don't know if I can call the police, right? Because the police might be out there doing civil unrest with, that's it. We had a case here over in Fishtown where the Proud Boys and the Philadelphia police were together. You can go back and find that on Twitter right now. So I mean, I think that's a really important thing, and that got a lot of activists upset here in Philadelphia because when you have policemen standing up with Proud Boys and taking pictures with them, I don't know. I mean, what are you saying to me, right?
Well, yeah, say that it's not white supremacist.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think we're in a time where policing is such a how do I want to put this, a really minefield issue, right? But I look at other countries who are able to do this, and again, they don't have the same weaponry, but there is a different way of policing. There is a different way to try to think about de-escalation and things like that. And so I think we also have to bring in the issue of race into this because it's really important. I mean, I was looking at Brad Parscale being taken down by the police on Sunday. They kind of, like body slammed him and tackled him. And a lot of people on my timeline were like, oh, that's horrible and everything. I was like, dude, he was lucky. He didn't get a knee in his neck. He didn't get shot. He got tackled. He's still alive today. But, a lot of people who've done far less have, caught a bullet by being stopped by the cops. So, here we are.
Well, in other countries, I mean, after the single mass shooting in New Zealand, there was a gun buyback turn-in program, right? Whereas every mass shooting in America, copycats go and buy the same gun.
Yeah, no, exactly. They buy the same gun. And not only that, every election cycle, we go in a uptick of guns. When Obama got in 2008, the gun sales went up like 400%. Right the week after he came in he was elected, and because everybody was like, well, Obama's going to take your guns, right? That was like one of the talking points for Republicans. And I just thought, what is it going to be this time? Oh, the pandemic, things are going to go crazy, whatever. I'm like, how many more guns can you buy, right? There's got to be enough. So
like Chekhov's gun, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You introduce a gun, it's going to be used. So it's basically like white Republicans in the South are heavily armed, and what's going to happen as a result of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think the other part of this is, which I thought was really interesting with 2016, is that a lot of African Americans have gotten armed since then, and I've seen women putting together gun societies and things like this. And so my question is like, oh, this is not going to be the same thing. I always like to remind these people, you think that only white people have guns, but other people have guns too. And it's not just some kids in the hood shooting each other. There are people who have concealed carry licenses and are able to get out there and do their stuff and go to the firing range and do everything else. So I think we got a real mixed bag this time that's going to be a little dangerous.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, Dawn. I got to always ask these questions because I'm interested in political scientists, because you all think different than a religious studies person trying to do politics, right? So I mean, to go back to that original question where you say is this the most important election cycle? Can you just talk to us about polls for a minute? I'm really curious about, all the polling shows, Biden is up, and, somebody said even the trash poll Rasmussen had him up today. Usually it's like a Trump poll, right? What do you want to say to the people that are sitting out here? Like, do you pay attention to the polls? How do you pay attention to them? I mean, I was a sociology minor, so I think a lot about polling in certain kinds of ways too. But I'm just wondering, what would you say about this polling, and what should people be looking for now? Because, and I'll just say the story as a story to, make you upset. All of the polling up to, in 2016 was like, oh, Hillary's got it. And then that stupid, ticker that they had on the New York Times page kept going the other way for Trump. And I was just like, I can't look at this thing anymore, right? It's like this visual cue that was like, make it be crazy. And so I just want to, ask, if this is an important election, how important are the polls?
Well, with all due respect to my colleagues at Poor's who call the elections for NBC, who spend a lot of time on polls, I would say don't believe any of them.
Okay, that's what I thought you'd say. That's why I asked you.
And it wasn't, I mean, you know, the hilarious in a really sad way. So I primarily study gender and historical politics, and I'm interested in the question of like, what was the gender gap just after women won voting rights?
Yeah.
And I was giving a talk at Princeton, 4 days after Clinton lost, and this sort of august senior white male dude, faculty member asks me, so what do you mean they didn't know how women were going to vote? And he is head of a polling thing at Princeton and predicted days before the election 100% chance that Clinton was going to win. And I said, well, you can have the most sophisticated polling apparatus in the world and amazingly fast computers and still not know how people are going to vote.
Yeah,
Duh.
exactly. Yeah.
But if you think about it, like, I think I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist at this point with respect to polls. I have tenure now, so I think I can say that out loud.
Go ahead and say it.
But it's like, if it were me and I were an evil strategist, I would be telling everybody who supports Trump to say they're going to support Biden to depress,
to depress the poll. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I thought everybody thought that Clinton was going to win, and Clinton thought that she was going to win. So she didn't go to Wisconsin, to Michigan, anywhere in the middle of it. Like, she ran a bad campaign, and it's unclear to me, like, is Biden running a better campaign? I don't, he's not leaving his house very much. Hopefully he's getting, good night's sleep or whatever. But
yeah, he's on the train today. He just started the train tour today, so he's taking
the train tour.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I don't watch them, and I think don't believe any of them. They were very wrong the last time, and there's no reason to suspect they're going to be any better than this time.
And this is good because it will segue into the other. Not that I'm supposed to be running this, but I'm going to ask questions anyway. It's because now I know how to. You and I know how to talk to each other about this and bring in gender. Okay. Can we talk? Forgive me. I'm going to say it. Let's say, what about white women? Okay. So because yesterday, one of the things that has been going around on social media is that like Trump, all that yelling and screaming last night. He says he's going to protect white women in the suburbs, bringing up this sort of 19th century vision of, the pure white damsel, Southern damsel in distress, right? Who needs to be protected by these roving mobs of Black people, right? And I'm being nice about it. I could say it in a whole completely different way. But I'm wondering, in 2016, the theory was that everybody basically, they said one thing and then they went into the room and did something else. So they didn't tell their husband or they didn't tell their friends that they were really voting for Trump. What are we talking about in the burbs? What do I have to think about the sisters down in Bucks County? These white ladies who shop at the same stores I do, but I'm like, are you voting for Trump this time? What are you going to do? How should we be looking at that this time? I know what I'm going to say about Black women. We know where they're going. But we know where they're going, and you should follow Black women because
you should follow them.
but I'm just wondering, what do you think happens this time?
I think that the majority of white women in my family that voted for Trump the last time are voting for Trump again.
Really? And what did they say?
Well, they say that they're concerned with the economy. Mm-hmm. They say that they don't want socialism.
Yeah. Okay. Of course. Yeah.
They say that, and I don't think the one thing they're not wrong about, and this is controversial, the ones who have 3 sons.
Yeah.
They basically are worried that the brave new world in which there may possibly be equality for women and maybe a smidge more equality for people of color is going to be bad for their nice white sons.
Oh, this is interesting.
And look, I'm like, you probably are right about that, but who cares? Like, you guys, you got everything you need. Like, I'm not a person who's going to say, inclusion is not zero sum. There are sacrifices that are going to be made, not sacrifices. You can't get anybody to make a sacrifice. You literally have to kick them out, put term limits and get new people. So I think that's the other issue, but that's something that people wouldn't say out loud, but they say the socialism thing out loud. And if you think about it, it's like, well, the bully that Trump is the bully at the end of their table. And it's
and they're married to him. So, there you go. Right.
married to him, but I don't think that but basically I don't think that women in the suburbs are voting. Like, I don't think that they're voting the way their husbands are telling them to. I think they're just voting the way that all the white people in the same suburb
are voting. Okay. Yeah. So it's
And-
more about a group thing.
Totally. And everybody's thought that forever. And of course,
Mhm.
you know, like slightly more than 50, like just slightly higher than 50% of white women have voted for the Republican Party for every single election since 1920.
Yeah.
It's the meaning of republicanism switched sometime, you know, around the Kennedy era or whatever, and the collapse of the Democratic Southern strategy. So, you know, that's going to endure for a while, I think.
Yeah.
Because white men are Republicans, you know, the majority of white men are Republicans. So there's obviously tons of white women that are Democrats. Half of all white women are Democrats, and white women are the largest number in the Democratic coalition because of the demographics of the electorate right now. Obviously, those are changing pretty rapidly, but yeah, they're going to vote for Trump again. Some of my grandmothers love him.
Really?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You know, I want to hear this because I think, you know, we need to know what attracts them. I mean, I think, you know, some of us may see it as boorishness and, you know, the loudness and everything else, right? But they see it as this is the you know, a performance of masculinity, right? That resonates to them because they're used to that, and it reminds them of a different time, let's say, right? And that construction, which has a lot to do with evangelicals too, is important to them. And so they see him as being able to protect them. What I thought you were going to say when you were talking about your relative with the 3 sons was that they didn't want their sons to have to go to the military or anything like that. And I thought that was a really interesting, you know, that it's about their advantages that they could have. But, you know, I wonder if there's a part in here about military, since Trump is sort of like, I'm going to pull back from all of this and everything. I mean, there's the one, he doesn't play this card very well. I think he could play it if he had a little bit more sense about himself. But the card about, I don't care about the military and I think you're stupid for serving, and yet he pulls out all the troops.
Right.
He could say, you know, I'm doing this to protect you. I'm doing this to keep people alive, as opposed to I just dislike this whole thing.
Totally. I don't think that the Republicans that I know are anti-security. No, I don't come from a military family at all. So, but in my family, we've got Tea Partiers, we've got evangelicals, and then there's the granite countertop suburban set. The granite countertop Republicans. Yeah. And granite countertop Republicans, you know, maybe some of them aren't going to vote. It's possible. But the other ones literally hear Trump is a racist and they say, oh, but he had lots of Black people up during the convention. And that worked. And it's partly just about the news that you're getting.
Yeah. And the silos that you're in about the news.
And the silos that you're in, where it's like this story about Trump paying $750 in taxes isn't even on Fox's website. You know, I go to Fox's website basically every day now just to see like what are my grandmothers reading, you know, and or watching, you know, related to that. I mean, I can't watch Fox News, but I do look at the.
Yeah. It seems to be, you know, part of it is about the siloing. Part of it is about all this other stuff. I think the other issue that comes up for me, or at least I think will be interesting in the next 4 weeks, is even though they don't have his taxes up, okay, right? This will be sort of an anniversary month for people to start remembering all of these things that happen to women, you know, let's just call it the pussy grabbing, all of these other kinds of things. And I'm wondering if, you know, and I'll say something about this too, but I wonder if, is that ever going to stick to him? Is it ever going to stick? It's probably not, but I just wonder, how does this, you know, frame what may happen next? I mean, Al Capone, they got him for money, okay? And that's the biggest thing that happened to him. Nothing else stuck. Murder, none of this other stuff ever sticks. But, you know, money is a thing that sticks. And so despite the fact that this is not on Fox News, I'm wondering if there are more revelations that are to come. If this is, you know, will this start to erode that just a little bit more? I mean, your granite top people are not going to care. But I do think about those people who are, you know, still Trump supporters who got bussed into Western Pennsylvania, you know, to go and see him and got paid $20 to go see him. And if they fought, you know, it's been a facade about what he's had. And so it's like seeing your reality TV star person, sort of shrink in size. And do you think that has any effect? I mean, it probably won't, but I'm just curious.
Well, yeah, if they get the memo.
Yeah.
But then,
That's all fake news, right?
Right. But as a spin doctor, he's brilliant because he's like, well, not paying taxes is smart.
Yeah.
And that works for a lot of people. And then there's the total red herring of, well, he pays a lot of other taxes, like payroll taxes.
Yeah.
Like, it's basically, the one thing political scientists think is that for the majority of vote choice, it's just partisanship, like how you actually cast your ballot. And so then everything else is a mobilization game. Yeah. And the big question in this election is just about turnout. That was going to be the question the whole time. And everybody has thought, for more than a year, this is going to be the largest turnout election we have ever seen. But the problem right now, and Trump put his finger on it last night, is that the states are not, most of the states are not well equipped to deal with millions of mail-in ballots. It's arduous to make sure that the person's actually registered, and then counting them thereafter is not straightforward because, of course, now you use some kind of a machine that automatically is doing the tallying. And so, infrastructurally, we are not ready in the states that don't already use mail-in balloting, like Oregon, where I am now. We're not ready to do it. And there are all of these states that have laws that ballots cannot be read or opened until election day, right? Yeah. So the biggest problem we're going to have is uncertainty in most of the battleground states for weeks after the election. Yeah. And the problem, Florida is not one of these states because Florida opens the ballots as they come in and has always had larger amounts of mail-in voting, in part because of, I think, snowbirding type things in Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
And the aging population. But there is not going to be, unless Florida is a landslide for one or the other, and we have, pretty reliable outcome in either Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, we're not going to know for several weeks, I don't think. And that period of not knowing is precisely where the comparative politics people who study Latin American elections or who study elections in Eastern and Central Europe, they're like, we have seen this happen again. Get ready for this because he's already undermining the election integrity. Right? He is already sabotaging the election. As my former advisor, Sue Stokes, wrote in the Seattle Times the other day, this is election sabotage. It's not a thing of the future. It is a thing of
happening now.
Happening. When he is doing this is sabotaging the election, And it's, this is a big problem. And I'm nervous about, the month after the election because I think there's a good chance that he's going to refuse. And that's a very scary thing for all of us.
Yeah. I was going to say, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? And that's probably it, right? Same thing for me. I think that keeps me up at night. And the fact that, should he win, I think that there is a mass exodus of people out of this country. I think, last time it was a joke, but I think this time it'd be real. Yeah. Because I think that, between COVID and everything else, there will be a brain drain. There's already been a brain drain that has happened through, immigration and other kinds of things. And I think for certain groups of people, it will not be an attractive place to be anymore. And it also means that you get another 4 years of whatever this has been. And, and I'm sure there's people out here who are for him and they have not had material hurt to their lives because their economics have been the same. I mean, the kinds of reasons that you stated, people think that the economy's fine for them, all of these things. But I think what people haven't seen yet are the mass evictions that will begin to occur, the kinds of food shortages that we will have because of the fires and things that happen. You're out on the West Coast, you know what's going on. I don't even have to tell you. So, there's a lot of stuff that is coming together in kind of an interesting way that has not really been talked about in this election at all, that is going to deplete the nation for the next few years to come. And I think that, the kinds of ways in which he's propped up the stock market are not going to help. And I think that, women and people of color and gays and, trans people, all these people who are like, just have had, they're, fairly stable and fairly, good laws, let's say, for protection, those protections are being stripped away as we speak. And I think that will create a lot more chaos than we're used to having in this country, even though we're having a lot of it right now.
Well, on the other hand, though, something that's really fascinating to me to think about is when Elizabeth Warren talks about this two-income trap, it's a brilliant way to summarize the problem of nuclear families in an economy where two people have to work in order to have the same standard of living that they grew up with because of a lot of different things. Oh yeah, we should probably go to outside questions. But my curiosity is, you saw all of this regentrification or gentrification of urban areas related to the two-income trap in the past 20 years, where people with college degrees were much more likely to want to live in cities than their parents' generation had. With the coronavirus, you've already seen, Robert Schiller out of Yale was announcing there's been a huge upsurge in houses, house purchases and things like that out of the cities by white people. And I'm just curious, are the white people that moved to the suburbs, are they going to start voting like suburban voters, or are we going to see some changes in how the voting is happening? Because the increased concentration of Democrats in cities is one of the problems. It's one of the reasons why the Republicans are winning statewide at the state level, given the majoritarian rules.
Yeah.
So I think we might see brain drain, but also there could be some state level shakeups in electoral politics as a result of this.
Yeah. That's a really good point. That's a very good point. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, there's tons of people moving. I have a friend who went up to Scranton, and she basically said like it's inundated with people from New York because it's 2 hours out. And if they have to go back to work, they can get out. But 2 hours away was enough for them to have a yard for the kids and everything. And so, yeah, I wonder about that. I also wonder too, with this move people moving like this in the midst of the census, this is going to change apportionships a lot. And, now that they've tacked on the extra month to go until the end of October, in Philadelphia, I think I saw that they only had 55% of the people have responded to the census so far. So that is going to change a lot if that, money doesn't come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just jump in here to open up the Q&A. So if folks who are watching on Facebook and YouTube want to submit a question, you can just make a comment. But I do have one prepared question that hopefully this loads from Hope Brindle, who is a GSWS student here at Penn.
Hi, Dr. Butler and Dr. Teele. My name is Hope Brindle, and I'm in year 3 studying political science and gender studies. My question is about the Biden-Sanders unity plan. Is a unity plan feasible and useful for some democratic policies concerning criminal justice, for example, or do unifying efforts like this water down policies in exchange for incremental change? Thanks for your thoughts.
Oh, that's a good one. Man, let me say this. I think it's really interesting to talk about a unity plan, because I think that's sort of Biden's thing. It's like, can't we all just get along? Can it just be like what it was in the 70s and 80s and, in the Senate, and how before we were all, stretched apart? I think it's going to be really difficult. I don't see this happening. I see that, Trump has had purchase with some of this, prison stuff, right? Prison reform and all of this, because that's been a way for him to get a hook with Black men in the community, right? And to talk about criminal justice reform. I don't know if that works the same way if Biden and Harris are trying to do this, and they're trying to get buy-in from Republicans. I think they're just going to get met with intransigence, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I'd be interested to hear what you say, Dawn.
Well, I'm all for, a more concerted effort towards climate change, and I'm for rejoining the Paris Accord. Frankly, I'm for the Green New Deal. And so I'm just wondering, I understand he's trying to distance himself from what everybody's calling socialism or whatever, which is sort of just like dignity for people. But so I think he should go even stronger.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. But I think, I think also the ways in which when you start talking about unity deal and all this, that word socialism and the things that I studied in the 1950s, you could just replace communism with socialism. And it's the
Right.
same thing, right? So people have been talking like this a long time on the right and for conservatives. And I think the biggest fear is that somebody gets something that I don't have, right?
Yeah.
But the other part of it is that I think people still want their health care. So we didn't really talk about that, but I think, this is one of the big issues that will, any kind of unity thing might have a chance with is healthcare, especially if
Yeah.
we go through a couple more years of this virus and we have a lot of people dead, a lot of people who have, long-term health issues because they got the virus.
Well, and it's clear that things that are negative externalities, like not seeking early enough healthcare information when you have the virus, is really bad for everybody else. The fact that we
Yeah.
don't have decent national centralized healthcare or even state centralized healthcare for everybody puts everybody at risk in a pandemic. So it seems obvious that it seems obvious that there could be that this could be the political moment for that kind of thing. But I think a lot of Americans don't have any appetite for universalist programs at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's not embedded in the nation's psyche about, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and, making it and all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, as my Tea Party grandfather says, get your government hands off my Medicare.
Yeah, well, exactly. I do not know what this Medicare was. There was a question in the chat that said, to what extent do you think Trump's bullying behavior in the last night's debate will hurt him among undecided? How do you judge Biden's performance? Thank you, Jonathan. This is an interesting question. I would say that his performance was a Joe Biden performance, which I'd give him like a B. I'd give him a B plus because basically, he didn't lose his, what too much, right? Although he did tell him to shut up and said he was a clown. I mean, I think that was probably, mild compared to what could have happened last night. And I think Trump's bullying behavior, I think it probably worries more Republican elites than it worries people who are used to this. Although I did see somebody make a comment today on Twitter that basically said, oh, well, this is going to be fine because lower class people deal like this anyway. And I'm like, not exactly. This is not the case. I think that it could be a turnoff because what you didn't hear was you didn't hear him say anything. You just heard all his grievances and you heard a lot of yelling. And he interrupted him 77 times. I paid attention to that statistic. And he's not going to be able to do that in that town hall. And so he's going to have to retrench. And I kind of I blame this on him, but I also blame it on Chris Christie. Yeah. I mean, I could see Chris Christie telling him that this was the way to go. I mean, if Chris Christie and Rudy Giuliani are your debate people, I mean, it's like having, the Keystone Cops or something. Like, don't bring them. They're not sophisticated enough to know how to do that. I mean, it might have been a good tactic to try to get Biden to stutter, but it wasn't a good tactic in terms of the showing. And he's embarrassed the nation, essentially. So, yeah, Biden is a B plus. Trump is definitely an F minus if that was possible.
Yeah, I mean, people in my family who support Trump are not talking to me right now, and they are not answering any of my text messages. So I'm unable to figure out how they felt about the debate performance or if they even watched it. But I think that, for his supporters, they think that that's what makes him the best because it's as if they're watching reality TV and that's what you're supposed to do is just crush the other guy. Mm-hmm. I agree with your ratings though. I mean, I thought Biden had a couple of moments there. But what's kind of sad is that most people liked the moment where he said, "Oh, shut up, man."
Yeah. Oh yeah. Everybody loved that because
they loved that.
Yeah, they loved it.
That's like not they go low, we go high. Like,
no, we low, we go lower. We're kneecapping you. I was just like, this was, I thought it was like, they used to have this thing called Celebrity Deathmatch on MTV. I was like, this is like Celebrity Deathmatch, except they're not in a cage. Right. I want them to have those big rubber things hitting each other and stuff. I mean, that might have been entertaining. The last night was entertaining. Yeah. Yeah. There was no.
That's one I might watch again. But last
Yeah.
night I was like kind of shuddering. Like,
Yeah, it was dirty. It was just it was kind of grimy and really and you know the person who really just couldn't do anything was Chris Wallace.
I know.
He was a horrific moderator, and they said they're going to change the debate style now. So I think that's true. But I mean, did it hurt him with women? You know, the women who came in there didn't like him anyway. Were not going to like Trump, right? And the women who liked Biden are going to stay liking Biden, right? So I think that you know the thing that the issue this month for Trump is how does he turn the ship around? And even though his people are going to come and he has a solid 44% all the time, he hasn't moved. And I think that's part of his biggest problem right now is that how do you get people on board when you have a pandemic, when the stock market is fluctuating and it's not as high as it used to be. It's not where it was this time last year. You don't have a message. You don't have a plan. You have not conveyed any plan. And you just annoyed with everybody and you're angry. That's no way to win. It doesn't look like a winning formula to me.
Well, yeah, and it's just sort of surprising that he even still wants this job. I don't think the presidency pays that much, and so it's like that's not going to cover your debts over the next 5 years.
And that's the worst part of this all is that we all know his debt, right? So everybody who's out here who has student loans, just you got to feel better now because it's not $411 million that you got to pay back,
right?
Or maybe even $1 billion. We're not even really sure right now.
Look what office we gave him. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So there's hope for you. There is hope for you.
Let's perhaps wrap up on this hopeful for all of us with enormous student debt. Let's maybe end on this positive, hopeful note. But I want to seriously thank you both so much for your wonderful and like riveting commentary. I've been sitting on the edge of my seat, and I think folks will. I think this will circulate widely. So I really appreciate your time to share your perspectives. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.